There's a sound that changes everything. For me, it was a fire alarm at 2:47 in the morning, not the kind that saves lives, but the kind that nearly ended mine. I ran through smoke-filled hallways, my lungs burning, my body failing, while people screamed and doors slammed and the world collapsed around me. But the worst part wasn't the fire. It wasn't even the fall that broke my body on those concrete stairs. The worst part was looking up through the smoke and seeing my sister standing there with her phone raised, filming me, smiling like she was waiting for something. And in that moment, as consciousness slipped away and I didn't know if I'd ever wake up again, I understood a truth that would haunt me for months: this wasn't an accident. This was content. They told me I was lucky to survive. $47,000 in medical debt. Everything I owned turned to ash. A family that asked me to forgive and forget because that's what families do. But I had something they didn't know about, a recording from that night, 7 minutes and 33 seconds that captured everything. Every scream. Every lie. Every word they thought no one would ever hear. And I had a choice: let it go and preserve the family, or demand accountability and lose everything else. Some people say revenge is poison. But sometimes, the truth is the only antidote to a wound that won't stop bleeding. If you want to know what happens when you choose truth over family, when you fight back against someone who thought your life was worth less than their content, stay with me. This is the story of how I almost died because of a prank, and how I made sure every single person responsible paid for what they did. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and comment below where you're watching from. Because this story doesn't end the way you think it does. The sound came first, before the smoke, before the screaming, before Evelyn Hart understood that she was about to die in a hallway she'd walked down 1,000 times before. It wasn't the fire alarm itself that made her heart stop. It was the wrongness of it. The piercing shriek that tore through her small Denver apartment at 2:47 a.m. didn't sound like a malfunction or a test. It sounded like a warning that came too late, like the universe screaming a truth her mind refused to accept: someone wanted this to happen. Evelyn jolted awake, her body responding before her brain could catch up. The darkness of her bedroom was different now, thicker, hostile, pressing against her skin like something alive. She could taste it before she could see it, the acrid bitterness of smoke curling under her door, creeping through the gap like fingers reaching for her throat. No. No, no, no. The words tumbled out in a whisper, her voice small and useless against the wailing alarm. Her hands fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, knocking over a half-empty water glass that shattered somewhere in the dark. The screen's glow illuminated her face, pale, frozen, eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from understanding, in one terrible instant, that everything you thought was safe is a lie. She had to move. She had to get out. But her legs wouldn't obey, locked in place by something deeper than fear, the primal knowledge that opening that door might be the last decision she ever made. The hallway would be worse. She knew this with absolute certainty. The smoke was already seeping in, which meant the fire was close, maybe right outside her door. The building was old, one of those renovated Victorian conversions in Capitol Hill that landlords marketed as charming and historic, while ignoring the outdated wiring and the absence of fire sprinklers. Evelyn had signed the lease anyway because it was all she could afford on a graphic designer's salary, because her sister Lauren had convinced her it would be fine, because she trusted that the universe wouldn't be cruel enough to burn down the one place she'd managed to build for herself after everything fell apart. The alarm screamed louder, or maybe it just felt that way as panic flooded her system. She forced herself to stand, her bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. Every disaster preparedness article she'd ever skimmed came rushing back in fragments: stay low, check the door for heat, don't open it if it's hot, find another way out. But there was no other way out. She lived on the 3rd floor. The window led to a rusted fire escape she'd never tested, never trusted. And the door, the only real exit, was already warm to the touch when she pressed her palm against it. Please, she whispered to no one, to God, to whatever force decided who lived and who became a statistic on the evening news. Please, not like this. She wrapped her hand in her t-shirt and turned the knob. The hallway was hell. Not the metaphorical kind, but something tangible and consuming, a roiling mass of gray-black smoke that swallowed the emergency lighting and turned familiar walls into a suffocating maze. The heat hit her face like a physical blow, singeing her eyebrows, making her eyes water instantly. Somewhere below, she heard wood cracking, the hungry sound of flames devouring structure, and she understood with brutal clarity that the building was going down. Help! Her scream disappeared into the chaos. Doors were slamming open and shut, neighbors she'd never spoken to now united in the same desperate scramble for survival. An elderly man from 3B stumbled past her, coughing so violently she thought his lungs might rupture. A young couple she recognized from the mailboxes ran toward the stairwell, the woman sobbing, the man pulling her forward with white-knuckled determination. Evelyn followed, because what else could she do? Her body moved on autopilot, bent low, one hand trailing along the wall that was growing hotter by the second. The smoke invaded her lungs with every breath, each inhale a betrayal that made her chest seize and her throat close up. This was how people died in fires, she remembered reading once, not from the flames, but from the smoke, from breathing in superheated air and toxic gases until your body simply gave up. She wouldn't make it. The realization hit her between one step and the next. The stairwell was too far. Her legs were weakening, her vision blurring at the edges. She was going to collapse in this hallway, and someone would find her body days later, curled up like she was sleeping, and they'd say what they always said, such a tragedy, so young, if only she'd gotten out sooner. That's when she saw her. Lauren. Her sister. Standing at the end of the hallway near the stairwell entrance, backlit by the emergency exit sign's ghostly green glow. She wasn't running. She wasn't coughing. She was just, standing there. With her phone in her hand. Raised. Pointed directly at Evelyn. And she was smiling. Not the tight-lipped, nervous smile of someone in shock. Not the wild, panicked expression of someone watching their sister fight for her life. It was something else, something that Evelyn's oxygen-deprived brain couldn't quite process but her gut understood immediately. It was the smile of someone watching something they'd planned unfold exactly as intended. The smile of someone filming a moment they wanted to capture. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for this. Lauren? Evelyn's voice came out as a rasp, barely audible over the alarm. She tried to move forward, but her legs betrayed her. One moment she was standing, and the next she was falling, her foot catching on something, her body pitching forward, her hands reaching out to break a fall that her weakening muscles couldn't prevent. She hit the stairs hard. Not the gentle tumble of someone tripping, but the brutal, physics-defying plummet of dead weight meeting unyielding surfaces. Her shoulder cracked against the edge of a step. Her head bounced off the metal railing with a sound that made her teeth rattle. Pain exploded through her body in waves, each impact driving the air from her lungs until she couldn't tell if she was breathing smoke or blood or both. The world tilted sideways. Sounds began to fade, the alarm growing distant, the screaming becoming muffled, as if someone was turning down the volume on reality itself. She could see the ceiling above her, or maybe it was the floor, spinning lazily like a carousel winding down. Somewhere in the haze, she heard sirens. Footsteps pounding closer. Voices shouting commands that didn't make sense anymore. And through it all, one image remained crystal clear, Lauren's face, illuminated by her phone screen, watching. Recording. Waiting to see if her sister would make it out alive. Or if she wouldn't. Evelyn's hand moved on instinct, muscle memory taking over where consciousness was failing. Her fingers found her phone, somehow still clutched in her grip, somehow still recording the voice memo she'd started when she first woke up, a habit from her therapy sessions, a way to document her anxiety spirals. The red recording dot pulsed in the corner of the screen like a heartbeat. She didn't remember pressing stop. She didn't remember the firefighters reaching her, lifting her, carrying her down the stairs and out into the October night where the Denver skyline glittered indifferently against the smoke-stained sky. She didn't remember the paramedics cutting off her t-shirt, attaching monitors, shouting numbers that meant her body was shutting down. But her phone remembered. The files saved automatically, uploaded to the cloud as emergency protocols kicked in, preserving everything, every scream, every crack of breaking wood, every moment of those 7 minutes and 33 seconds when Evelyn Hart ran for her life while someone watched her do it. The last thing she registered before the darkness took her completely was a sensation that would haunt her for months afterward, the feeling of being prey. Of being hunted. Of being the punchline to a joke she hadn't known was being told. And somewhere in the chaos, as consciousness slipped away like water through her fingers, a single question formed in the dying embers of her awareness, a question that would unravel everything she thought she knew about family, about safety, about the thin line between a prank and premeditated cruelty. Was this really just a joke? Or had her sister been planning to watch her die all along? The machines beeped first, a rhythmic, mechanical pulse that dragged Evelyn back from the void before her mind was ready to return. Then came the pain, not all at once but in layers, each one revealing itself like a map of everything her body had endured. Her throat felt scraped raw, as if someone had taken sandpaper to the inside of her windpipe. Her shoulder throbbed with a deep, bone-level ache that suggested something was broken or at least severely damaged. And her lungs, God, her lungs felt like they'd been filled with concrete, each breath a laborious task that required conscious effort. She tried to open her eyes, but the lids were too heavy, crusted with something she didn't want to identify. The voices around her were muffled, distorted, like she was listening from underwater. Medical jargon floated past: oxygen saturation, smoke inhalation, contusions, possible concussion, words that meant her body was a catalogue of damage, a testament to how close she'd come to not making it at all. "We almost lost her twice in the ambulance," a woman's voice said, clinical and detached. A doctor, probably. Someone trained to deliver devastating news with the emotional weight of a weather report. Her oxygen levels crashed. If the paramedics hadn't intubated when they did. The voice trailed off, but Evelyn understood the implication. She'd been dying. Maybe she had died, briefly, in that space between the burning building and this sterile hospital room. Maybe she'd crossed over and come back, and that's why everything felt wrong now, displaced, like she'd returned to a world that wasn't quite the same one she'd left. More voices joined the first. A man, younger, his tone carrying the forced optimism of someone who'd been trained to never sound hopeless. "The next 48 hours are critical. We need to monitor for pulmonary edema, cardiac complications. Her body went through significant trauma. The fall alone could have. Is she going to make it?" That voice was different. Familiar. Lauren. Evelyn's heart rate spiked, she could hear it in the suddenly frantic beeping of the monitor beside her bed. Her sister was here. The same sister who'd stood in that hallway with her phone raised, watching, smiling, doing nothing while Evelyn fought for air and consciousness and life itself. "We're doing everything we can," the doctor replied, and Evelyn wanted to scream at the inadequacy of that answer, at the way it meant nothing and everything simultaneously. "But I have to be honest with you, the damage to her respiratory system is extensive. We won't know the full extent until she regains consciousness." If she regains consciousness. If. Such a small word. Such devastating implications. "She's strong," Lauren said, and there was something in her voice that made Evelyn's skin crawl even through the haze of pain and medication. It wasn't concern. It was performance. The careful modulation of someone who knew they were being watched, being judged, being measured against the standards of what a worried sister should sound like. "She's always been strong. It's just so horrible. I can't believe this happened. Can't believe it happened." As if it were an act of God, a random tragedy, a cosmic accident that no one could have predicted or prevented. Not something that someone might have orchestrated. Not something that someone might have wanted. The medical team moved away, their footsteps retreating down what Evelyn imagined was a long corridor lined with other rooms full of other broken people. She was alone now with Lauren, and the silence between them felt heavy, pregnant with all the questions that Evelyn's unconscious mind was screaming but her body was too damaged to articulate. She felt movement beside the bed, Lauren pulling up a chair, sitting down with a theatrical sigh that carried just the right amount of exhaustion and worry. Then came the touch, Lauren's hand covering Evelyn's limp one, fingers intertwining in a gesture that should have been comforting but instead felt like a violation. "I'm so sorry, Evie," Lauren whispered, and Evelyn could hear the tears in her voice, real or manufactured, impossible to distinguish. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. When I heard the alarm, I panicked. I ran. I should have come to get you, I should have made sure you were okay, but I was so scared and I just..." The words poured out in a rush, a confession that didn't actually confess anything. An apology that somehow made Lauren the victim of her own fear rather than the person who'd stood there filming while her sister collapsed. Evelyn wanted to pull her hand away, wanted to open her eyes and demand answers, wanted to ask why the smile, why the phone, why the complete absence of action in those crucial seconds when intervention might have changed everything. But her body wouldn't cooperate. She was trapped in this half-conscious state, aware but unable to respond, a prisoner in her own damaged flesh. Lauren's phone buzzed, the vibration audible in the quiet room. There was a pause, then the sound of Lauren typing, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. More buzzing. More typing. The rhythm of someone managing a crisis, controlling a narrative, making sure the right story was being told to the right people. "I'm at the hospital with Evelyn," Lauren said suddenly, and Evelyn realized she was on a call, probably video, because her sister's voice had taken on that particular brightness people used when they knew they were being recorded. "It's bad. Really bad. The doctors aren't sure if she's going to," a strategic pause, a choked sob. "I'm just trying to stay positive, you know. She'd want me to stay positive." More silence. Then, yeah, everyone got out. It was the old wiring, apparently. The landlord was supposed to fix it months ago. It's such a tragedy. Poor Evie was on the 3rd floor. She fell down the stairs trying to escape. If only she'd been faster, if only. If only. Another meaningless phrase that shifted responsibility away from anyone who might have had the power to prevent this. The call ended. Lauren set her phone down on the bedside table with a soft click, and then there was just breathing, hers steady and controlled, Evelyn's labored and mechanical, assisted by the oxygen mask pressing against her face. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time had lost all meaning in this place where the only markers were the beeps of machines and the shuffle of nurses checking vitals and the occasional overhead page calling doctors to emergencies that might be worse than Evelyn's, might be better, might be exactly the same flavor of preventable disaster. "You're going to be okay," Lauren said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to be okay. Because if you're not," she didn't finish the sentence, but Evelyn heard the implication. If Evelyn wasn't okay, then someone would ask questions. Someone would investigate. Someone would want to know why Lauren had made it out without a scratch while her sister had nearly died. The door opened again, admitting new voices, visitors, maybe, or more medical staff. Evelyn couldn't tell anymore. Everything was blending together, a soup of consciousness and unconsciousness, awareness and oblivion. But before she slipped back under, before the medication pulled her down into the dark again, she heard something that made her blood run cold even through the warmth of the hospital blankets. Laughter. Quiet, quickly stifled, but unmistakable. Someone was laughing. And it was coming from just outside her room, in the hallway where families gathered to wait for news about their loved ones. Young voices, multiple people, the kind of nervous giggling that happened when people knew they should be serious but couldn't quite manage it. "It was just supposed to be a prank," one voice said, male, unfamiliar. "The alarm was supposed to go off and scare everyone. That's it. How were we supposed to know?" "Shut up," Lauren hissed, and there was steel in her voice now. The performance dropped for just a moment. "Not here. Not now." Footsteps retreated. The laughter faded. And Evelyn was left with a truth that burned worse than any smoke she'd inhaled: this hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been faulty wiring or bad luck or the universe's random cruelty. It had been planned. Orchestrated. A prank that had gone catastrophically wrong, or maybe exactly as intended. And everyone knew. Everyone except her. Consciousness returned in fragments over the next 36 hours, each piece of awareness bringing with it new dimensions of pain and understanding. Evelyn would surface briefly, long enough to register the drip in her arm, the oxygen tube in her nose, the way her body felt like it belonged to someone else, then sink back into medicated darkness before the full weight of what had happened could crush her. But eventually, inevitably, she stayed awake. And with wakefulness came the bills. They arrived on the third day, delivered by a hospital administrator who had the grace to look apologetic as she explained the situation. No insurance. Evelyn had let it lapse 2 months ago when freelance work dried up and she'd had to choose between coverage and rent. The apartment building had no liability insurance either, a detail the landlord had conveniently omitted. And the fire marshal's preliminary report cited undetermined origin, which meant no clear party to hold responsible, no easy target for a lawsuit, no path to compensation. The numbers on the invoice blurred together, but the total at the bottom remained brutally clear: $47,832.19. For 3 days in the ICU, emergency treatment, X-rays, CT scans, respiratory therapy, medications Evelyn couldn't pronounce. Money she didn't have. Money she would spend the next decade paying off, if she was lucky. Money that represented the exact dollar value the American healthcare system had assigned to her survival. "We can set up a payment plan," the administrator said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "And there are charity programs you might qualify for. We just need you to fill out these forms." Evelyn signed where she was told to sign, her hands shaking so badly the signatures looked like they'd been written during an earthquake. The administrator left, taking the papers and Evelyn's last shred of financial security with her. The room felt smaller after that, the walls pressing in, the weight of debt settling over her like a second blanket, one she'd never be able to throw off. She was alone now. Lauren had left an hour ago, citing work obligations, promising to return later with clothes and toiletries. The nurses had propped Evelyn into a semi-sitting position, and for the first time since the fire, she could see the world beyond her hospital bed with something approaching clarity. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the linoleum floor. A TV mounted in the corner played the news with the sound muted, images of traffic accidents and political debates and weather forecasts, the mundane machinery of a world that had kept turning while Evelyn had been dying. Her phone sat on the rolling table beside her bed, retrieved from her apartment by one of the firefighters. The case was cracked, the screen smudged with soot, but it still worked. Evelyn stared at it for a long time before reaching for it, her fingers clumsy with tape and lingering weakness. She didn't know what she was looking for: distraction, maybe, or connection to the life she'd had before everything burned. She opened her messages first. Dozens of texts from people she barely knew, neighbors, former co-workers, distant cousins who'd somehow heard the news and felt compelled to offer thoughts and prayers. Each message followed the same template: "So sorry to hear, you're in our thoughts, let us know if you need anything." The kind of hollow comfort that made people feel like they'd done something meaningful without actually requiring them to do anything at all. Lauren's texts were different. A timeline of crisis management: "I'm on my way, the doctors say you're stable, everyone's asking about you, I told them you're strong." Each message carefully crafted, each one shareable, designed to paint a picture of a devoted sister keeping vigil. There were no questions about how Evelyn was actually feeling, no acknowledgement of what had really happened in that hallway, no explanation for the smile or the phone or the deliberate inaction. Evelyn's thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. She should respond. Should say thank you. Should play her part in this narrative where everything was an accident and everyone was blameless and gratitude was the only acceptable emotion. Instead, she opened her voice memos app. She didn't remember why she'd started recording that night. It was something her therapist had suggested months ago, back when panic attacks were waking her up at 3 a.m. and she needed a way to document the spiraling thoughts so they'd feel less overwhelming in the morning. She'd record herself talking through the anxiety, "This is just a feeling, it will pass, you are safe," and play it back later to prove to herself that the terror had been temporary, survivable. The app showed her most recent recording, timestamped 2:47 a.m. on October 23, duration, 7 minutes, 33 seconds. The file name was just a string of numbers, meaningless and automated. Evelyn's finger trembled over the play button. Part of her didn't want to know what was on there, didn't want to relive those 7 minutes, didn't want to hear herself dying in real time. But a larger part, the part that had felt Lauren's hand squeeze hers with just a little too much pressure, that had heard the laughter in the hallway, that had seen the performance of sisterly devotion that didn't quite reach Lauren's eyes, that part needed to know. She pressed play. The first sounds were muffled, fabric rustling, her own breathing sharp and panicked, the distant wail of the alarm. Then her voice, frightened and small, "Something's wrong. The alarm, it's not right. There's smoke. Oh God, there's smoke under the door." A crash, the water glass shattering. More breathing, faster now, edging into hyperventilation. "I have to get out. I have to." The door opening. The rush of sound, screaming, crackling flames, the alarm so much louder it distorted the phone's microphone. Her footsteps, stumbling, irregular. Coughing that sounded like her lungs were tearing themselves apart. And then, cutting through everything else, a voice. Lauren's voice. "Oh my God, this is perfect. Are you getting this?" Another voice, male, breathless with excitement or fear or both. Yeah, I'm recording. Holy shit, this is insane." Wait, Lauren again, clearer now. "Let me get a better angle. Move left. No, you're left." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, the phone nearly slipping from her grip. She paused the recording, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might trigger the monitors, might bring nurses running. But the machines kept their steady rhythm, oblivious to the way her entire reality was restructuring itself. They'd been filming. Not just Lauren, but others. Multiple people with their phones out, capturing the chaos, treating it like entertainment. And they'd been talking about angles and recording like they were shooting a movie, not watching real people flee for their lives. Evelyn forced herself to press play again. The recording continued, her own gasping breaths, the thunder of footsteps on stairs, the horrible crunch of her body hitting the landing. Then silence, or something close to it. The rustle of movement. Sirens in the distance, growing closer. And underneath it all, barely audible, Lauren's voice one more time. "Do you think she's..." "Don't." The male voice, sharp. "Don't say it. Just, let's get out of here before..." The audio cut off. The file ended. And Evelyn sat in her hospital bed, staring at the phone in her hands, understanding with absolute clarity that she was holding evidence of something that went beyond a prank gone wrong. This was premeditated. This was calculated. This was a group of people who decided that terrorizing an entire building, that risking lives, that filming someone's potential death was worth it for content, for views, for whatever validation they got from posting shocking videos online. Her finger moved without conscious thought, tapping through the phone's settings, finding the cloud backup option. The file had already synced, uploaded automatically to her account, safe from deletion or damage. She stared at the confirmation for a long moment, then did something that felt both reckless and necessary. She created a new folder, labeled it with today's date, and copied the audio file 3 times. Once to her email, sent to an address Lauren didn't know about. Once to a file-sharing service with a password only Evelyn knew. And once to a text message addressed to herself, scheduled to send in exactly 7 days if she didn't cancel it. Insurance. Evidence. Proof that what had happened to her wasn't an accident, wasn't bad wiring or cosmic misfortune, but human cruelty dressed up as entertainment. The door to her room swung open, making Evelyn jump. A nurse entered, checking the 4-bag, making notes on a tablet. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her tone professionally cheerful. "Pain level?" "Fine," Evelyn lied, her voice hoarse from smoke damage and disuse. "I'm fine." The nurse gave her a look that suggested she'd heard that lie before from countless other patients, but she didn't push. She adjusted the 4-drip, checked the monitors, and left with a reminder to press the call button if Evelyn needed anything. Alone again, Evelyn looked down at her phone, at the audio file that contained the truth everyone seemed desperate to bury. She had a choice now. She could delete it, pretend she'd never heard it, accept Lauren's version of events and move on with her life burdened only by medical debt and trauma. That would be easier. That would preserve the family. That would let everyone save face. Or she could keep it. Could protect it. Could hold on to this evidence like a weapon she might need to use someday, when the performance of concern faded and the reality of what had been done to her demanded consequences. Her thumb hovered over the delete button for exactly 3 seconds. Then she locked the phone, placed it face down on the table, and closed her eyes. The choice had already been made the moment she'd backed up the file. There was no going back now. They came on the 5th day, descending on Evelyn's hospital room like a tribunal convened to deliver judgment she hadn't asked for. Her mother arrived first, Patricia Hart, 58 years old and weathered by decades of choosing the path of least resistance. She carried a vase of grocery store carnations that already looked half dead, their pink petals browning at the edges, a metaphor Evelyn was too exhausted to fully appreciate. "Oh, honey." Patricia set the flowers on the windowsill and approached the bed with the careful steps of someone navigating a minefield. "Look at you. You look so," she stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "So damaged. So broken. So much like a problem that required solutions Patricia didn't have the energy to provide." Evelyn's father came next, Roger Hart shuffling in behind his wife with the defeated posture of a man who'd learned long ago that family drama was best handled by saying nothing and hoping it resolved itself. He nodded at Evelyn, actual words apparently too much to ask, and stationed himself by the door like he was planning his escape route before he'd even fully entered. Then Lauren, arriving last in a cloud of expensive perfume and carefully constructed remorse. She'd dressed for the occasion, soft gray sweater, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested she was too worried about her sister to care about her appearance, even though Evelyn knew Lauren had probably spent 45 minutes achieving that exact look. "How are you feeling?" Lauren asked, taking the chair closest to the bed, reaching for Evelyn's hand with a grip that felt less like comfort and more like ownership. "I've been better." Evelyn's voice came out flat, devoid of the warmth that family gatherings were supposed to contain. She pulled her hand away, slowly, deliberately, and watched something flicker across Lauren's face, surprise, maybe, or annoyance that the script wasn't being followed. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Patricia fussed with the carnations, rearranging them in a way that made no actual difference. Roger studied his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. And Lauren sat there, her expression cycling through emotions like someone flipping through Instagram filters, trying to find the one that fit the moment. "We need to talk about what happened," Patricia said finally, her voice taking on that tone she always used when she was about to say something she knew Evelyn wouldn't want to hear. "Lauren told us everything, about the fire, about how scared everyone was, about how it was just a terrible accident with the wiring." "Is that what she told you?" Evelyn's eyes locked on her sister, watching for the reaction. "That it was the wiring?" Lauren's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went hard. "That's what the fire marshal said. Faulty electrical system in an old building. It's nobody's fault, Evie. It's just one of those things. One of those things." As if Evelyn had been struck by lightning or hit by a meteor, some act of God that no human hand had guided. Not something that had been planned, filmed, turned into entertainment while she choked on smoke and fallen downstairs and nearly died. "There were people in the hallway," Evelyn said quietly. "People with phones. Recording. The room went still. Patricia's hands froze mid-flower arrangement. Roger's gaze snapped up from his shoes. And Lauren's face did something complicated, a micro-expression that came and went so fast Evelyn almost missed it. Fear, maybe. Or calculation. Everyone records everything now, Lauren said, her tone dismissive, almost condescending. It's how people process trauma. They film it. It doesn't mean anything. It means something when you're standing there smiling while your sister is dying. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and toxic. Patricia made a small sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a protest. Roger shifted his weight, suddenly very interested in being anywhere but in this room. And Lauren's carefully constructed expression cracked, just slightly, revealing something raw and ugly underneath. I wasn't, Lauren started, then stopped, recalibrating. Evie, you were unconscious. You were hallucinating from the smoke. You don't know what you saw. I know what I heard. Evelyn's hand moved to her phone on the bedside table, not picking it up, just letting her fingers rest against it. A warning. A promise. I have the recording from that night. Everything that happened. Everything that was said. The silence that followed was different now, charged, dangerous. Lauren's eyes darted to the phone, then to their mother, then back to Evelyn. The performance was dropping away piece by piece, revealing the person underneath, and she wasn't the concerned sister anymore. She was someone cornered, someone calculating her next move. Evelyn. Patricia's voice took on a pleading quality. Whatever you think you heard, whatever you think happened, you need to let this go. Lauren made a mistake. She panicked. People do stupid things when they're scared. But she's your sister. Family forgives family. That's what we do. A mistake. Evelyn repeated the word slowly, tasting its inadequacy. Mom, do you know how much my hospital bills are? $47,000. For 3 days. Because I almost died in a fire that Lauren, she stopped herself, the accusation too big to voice fully, too dangerous to release into this small room with these people who'd already decided which version of the truth they could live with. We'll help you, Patricia said quickly. We'll figure out the money. We always do. But you can't, she glanced at Lauren, then back to Evelyn. You can't do anything that would hurt your sister. She's been through enough. The guilt alone has been eating her alive. Evelyn almost laughed. Guilt. As if Lauren had spent the past 5 days consumed by remorse rather than managing her social media presence, controlling the narrative, making sure everyone saw her as the devoted sister rather than, what? What did you call someone who turned your near death into content? Has she told you about her YouTube channel? Evelyn asked, the question emerging from some bitter place deep in her chest. The one where she posts prank videos? Where she has almost 200,000 subscribers who love watching her do crazy things for views? Roger spoke for the first time, his voice gruff with discomfort. That's her job, Evelyn. She makes good money from that. You can't blame her for. For what? Evelyn's voice rose, the heart monitor beside her bed accelerating. For pulling a fire alarm as a prank? For filming people running for their lives? For standing there watching while I collapsed? What exactly can't I blame her for, Dad? It wasn't supposed to be like that. Lauren's composure finally shattered, her voice cracking with something that might have been genuine emotion or might have been anger at having her carefully constructed story challenged. It was supposed to be funny. Just a scare. The alarm was supposed to go off for like 30 seconds and then stop. We weren't supposed to. She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what she'd just admitted. The room went silent except for the mechanical beeping of Evelyn's monitors. Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Roger's face had gone pale. And Lauren sat there, her eyes wide, realizing she'd just confirmed everything Evelyn had accused her of. You planned it, Evelyn said, her voice eerily calm now. You plan to terrorize an entire building full of people. For a video. For content. For your channel. It was just supposed to be a prank, Lauren whispered. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. The building wasn't supposed to actually. She stopped again, but it was too late. The truth was out now, floating in the air between them like toxic gas. Patricia recovered first, her survival instincts kicking in. Okay. Okay, so there was a prank. A stupid, thoughtless prank. But Lauren didn't start the actual fire. That was the wiring. That was the building's fault. So really, when you think about it, none of this is. None of this is her fault. Evelyn's voice was ice now. Mom, are you actually hearing yourself? I'm saying that these things happen, Patricia said, her voice rising with desperation. And I'm saying that if you push this, if you make this into something bigger than it needs to be, you're going to tear this family apart. Is that what you want? To destroy your sister's life over a mistake? My life is already destroyed. Evelyn gestured at the hospital room, at her body covered in bruises and 4 lines, at the bills that would follow her for years. I don't have an apartment. I don't have insurance. I can barely breathe without coughing up blood. And you're asking me to protect the person who did this to me? Lauren was crying now, real tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Evie. I never meant for any of this to happen. You have to believe me. You're my sister. I love you. I would never. Get out. The words came from somewhere deep inside Evelyn, cold and final. Evie, Patricia started. All of you. Get out. You don't mean that, Roger said, finally finding his voice. You're upset. You're hurt. But you don't mean. If you make me choose between protecting Lauren and telling the truth about what happened, Evelyn said, her eyes moving from her father to her mother to her sister, I'm going to tell the truth. And if that makes me the villain in this family, if that makes me the one who destroyed everything, then fine. I'll be that person. But I'm done pretending this was just an accident. I'm done protecting people who wouldn't cross a hallway to save my life. Lauren stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of tears and something darker. If you do this, if you try to ruin me, you'll be alone. Nobody's going to believe you over me. Nobody's going to side with you. Then I'll be alone. Patricia made one last attempt. Evelyn, please. Think about what you're doing. Family is everything. When everyone else is gone, family is what you have left. Don't throw that away because you're angry. But Evelyn was done listening. She closed her eyes, turned her face to the wall, and waited for them to leave. It took another minute of uncomfortable silence, of whispered conversations she refused to acknowledge, of Lauren's quiet sobbing and Patricia's desperate pleas. But eventually, finally, they left. And Evelyn was alone with her truth, her evidence, and the crushing understanding that choosing justice meant choosing solitude. The law office of Morrison and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in Denver's Lodo district, the kind of space that tried too hard to look successful: exposed brick, industrial lighting, motivational posters about justice that had probably been ordered from the same catalog as every other law firm in America. Evelyn sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white, watching the second hand on the wall clock drag itself through time like it was moving through concrete. She'd been discharged from the hospital 4 days ago with a list of follow-up appointments she couldn't afford and prescriptions that cost more than her monthly grocery budget. A friend from college, one of the few who'd reached out with actual offers of help rather than empty platitudes, had let Evelyn crash on her couch in Aurora, a 30-minute train ride from anything resembling Evelyn's old life. Everything she owned now fit in 2 suitcases and a garbage bag. Everything else had been destroyed in the fire or was still locked in a condemned building, inaccessible until the investigation concluded. If it ever concluded. The fire marshal's report had been officially filed yesterday. Undetermined origin with contributing factors including outdated electrical systems and lack of proper fire suppression equipment. No mention of alarm tampering. No mention of the multiple witnesses who'd fled the building. No mention of the prank that had set everything in motion. Just bureaucratic language that absolved everyone of responsibility while simultaneously blaming a building that could no longer defend itself. Evelyn had read the report 3 times, each pass making her angrier, making the injustice of it all settle deeper into her bones. That's when she'd started Googling lawyers. Not the big firms with billboards and TV commercials, but smaller practices that handled personal injury cases, that might be willing to work on contingency, that might actually care about someone with no money and a story that sounded too bizarre to be believed. Morrison and Associates had been the 4th firm she'd called. The first 3 had politely declined after hearing the basics: too complicated, too much he said she said, not enough clear liability. But Sarah Morrison had listened to Evelyn's entire story over the phone, asked careful questions, and then said 5 words that had made Evelyn's chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "I think we have something. Ms. Hart." A young woman with a tablet appeared in the doorway, her smile professionally warm. "Sarah will see you now." The office was smaller than Evelyn had expected, cramped with filing cabinets and stacks of case folders that suggested Morrison either had too many clients or not enough staff. Sarah Morrison herself was in her early 40s, her dark hair streaked with premature gray, wearing a blazer that had seen better days. She stood when Evelyn entered, extending a hand that felt reassuringly solid. "Thank you for coming in," Sarah said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I know this can't be easy. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm making a terrible mistake," Evelyn admitted, sinking into the chair. "Like I'm about to destroy what's left of my family for something that might not even matter." Sarah's expression softened with what looked like genuine empathy, not pity, which Evelyn had seen too much of lately, but the acknowledgement of someone who understood that doing the right thing often felt like self-destruction. "Let me be very honest with you about what pursuing this will mean," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "Because I need you to go into this with clear eyes." She pulled out a yellow legal pad covered in notes. "First, the good news. You have evidence, the audio recording. That's significant. It establishes that your sister and her friends were present, that they were filming, and that they acknowledged some level of planning. That gives us a foundation." Evelyn nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The challenging part," Sarah continued, "is proving causation and establishing liability. Your sister didn't set the fire, the building's electrical system did that. What she did was trigger a false alarm, which created panic, which contributed to your injuries. That's what we call a chain of causation, and it's legally complicated. A good defense attorney, and your sister will get a good defense attorney, will argue that the actual fire was unforeseeable, that the building's code violations were the proximate cause of your injuries, not the prank. So you're saying I can't win?" Evelyn's voice came out hollow. "I'm saying it won't be easy. But there are other angles. Emotional distress. Negligence. Reckless endangerment. And if we can prove your sister intended to monetize this through her social media presence, we might be able to argue a profit motive that elevates the severity." Sarah paused, studying Evelyn carefully. "But here's what you need to understand before we go forward: this will get ugly. Very ugly." "How ugly?" "Your sister has a platform, 200,000 subscribers, you said. That means she has reach. She has fans. She has people invested in her version of reality. The moment we file, the moment this becomes public, she's going to do what influencers do, she's going to tell her story. And her story is going to paint you as vindictive, as someone who's trying to destroy her over an accident, as the villain who can't forgive an honest mistake." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd thought about this, of course, in the abstract way you think about hypothetical consequences. But hearing it laid out in concrete terms, the social media campaigns, the harassment, the way her name would be dragged through the digital mud, made it real in a way that was almost paralyzing. "They'll go after you," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but unflinching. "They'll dig into your past. They'll find every unflattering photo, every stupid thing you've ever said online, every failed relationship or job you've quit. They'll manufacture a narrative where you're jealous of your sister's success, where you've always been the problem child, where this is really about attention or money or revenge." "It's not about any of that," Evelyn said, but her voice wavered. "I know. But truth and perception aren't the same thing, especially not online. And perception is what influencers trade in." Sarah leaned forward. "Your family will be forced to choose sides publicly. Your mother, your father, your extended family, they'll all have to decide whether to support you or Lauren. And based on what you've told me about their reaction at the hospital, I think we both know which side most of them will choose." The weight of it pressed down on Evelyn's chest, making it hard to breathe, harder than the smoke damage had made it, because this suffocation was emotional, the understanding that seeking justice meant accepting isolation as the price of truth. "What if I can't handle it?" she whispered. "What if it breaks me?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Then you walk away. You take the medical debt, you rebuild your life quietly, and you let this go. There's no shame in that, Evelyn. Survival takes many forms. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over justice. But if you don't do this, if you let your sister walk away from what she did with no consequences, you'll carry that differently. You'll know that she got away with it. That she'll probably do it again, maybe not a fire, but some other stunt, some other prank that crosses a line because there was never a reckoning for this one. And every time you struggle to pay a medical bill, every time you have a nightmare about smoke, you'll know that the person responsible is out there making videos and collecting ad revenue and living her life like none of this mattered." The truth of it hit Evelyn like a physical blow. This wasn't really a choice at all. It was an inevitability she'd been moving toward since the moment she'd heard that audio recording, since she'd understood that her near death had been entertainment to people who should have loved her. "What happens if we win?" she asked. "If we win, and it's a big if, we'd likely settle before it goes to trial. Most of these cases do. We'd negotiate compensation for your medical expenses, pain and suffering, lost wages. If we can prove intentional infliction of emotional distress, we might get punitive damages. We're talking anywhere from 100,000 to $500,000, depending on how strong our case looks and how badly your sister wants to avoid a public trial." $500,000. The number seemed abstract, impossible. More money than Evelyn had ever imagined having. Enough to pay off the hospital debt, to start over, to maybe even afford therapy to process the trauma that woke her up gasping every night at 2:47 a.m. "And if we lose? You get nothing. You're still in debt. And you've publicly accused your sister of something you couldn't prove, which means defamation becomes a possibility if she decides to countersue." Sarah's expression was grave. "I want to be very clear, this is a gamble. There's a real chance you walk away from this worse off than you started." Evelyn looked down at her hands, at the scars from the 4 lines, at the tremor that never quite went away anymore. She thought about Lauren standing in that hallway with her phone raised. She thought about her mother's plea to protect the family. She thought about the $47,000 that would follow her like a shadow for the rest of her life if she did nothing. She was smiling, Evelyn said quietly. When I was dying, when I was falling, when I couldn't breathe, she was smiling. And I need her to understand that actions have consequences. That you can't just do whatever you want to people and walk away because you're sorry or because family means you get infinite chances. Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we move forward. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll take care of yourself through this. That you'll find a therapist, build a support system, take breaks when you need them. Because this is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, and I need you strong enough to make it to the finish line." Evelyn took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her like armor, heavy, uncomfortable, but necessary. "Okay. Let's do it. Sarah pulled out a contract, began explaining the terms of representation, but Evelyn barely heard her. She was thinking about Lauren's YouTube channel, about the 200,000 people who watched her videos and laughed at her pranks and had no idea what the cost of that entertainment really was. Soon, Evelyn thought, they would know. Soon, everyone would know. And there would be no going back. The lawsuit was filed on a gray Tuesday morning in November, 8 weeks after the fire. Sarah had warned Evelyn that things would move quickly once the papers were served, but nothing could have prepared her for the speed at which her life transformed from private tragedy to public spectacle. Lauren's response came within hours, not through lawyers or official channels, but through the platform she knew best. Evelyn was sitting in her borrowed bedroom, really just a converted dining room with a curtain for a door, when her phone started vibrating with notification after notification. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Tags on social media platforms she barely used. Her name, suddenly everywhere, attached to accusations she hadn't made yet in any public forum. She opened Instagram with trembling fingers and found Lauren's post immediately. It had been up for 37 minutes and already had over 15,000 comments. The photo was a carefully curated shot of Lauren sitting on her apartment floor, no makeup, eyes red and swollen, wearing an oversized sweatshirt that made her look small and vulnerable. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. "I've been silent because I was hoping this could stay private, but my sister has decided to sue me for something that was a tragic accident. Yes, there was a prank, a stupid, thoughtless alarm that should never have happened. I take full responsibility for that. But I did not cause the fire. The building's electrical system did. And now, instead of healing together as a family, I'm being blamed for something I couldn't control. I'm devastated. I'm heartbroken. And I'm scared of what happens when someone you love decides to destroy you for a mistake you've apologized for 1,000 times. Please respect my privacy as I try to navigate this nightmare. Red heart." The comments were a feeding frenzy of support, outrage, and performative empathy. Thousands of strangers who knew nothing about what had actually happened had already decided Evelyn was a monster, a gold digger, a jealous sister trying to capitalize on her sibling's success. The narrative Lauren had constructed was simple, sympathetic, and spreading like the fire that had nearly killed Evelyn 2 months ago. "Don't read them," Sarah had advised when Evelyn called her, voice shaking. "Don't engage. Don't defend yourself. That's what she wants, for you to react emotionally, to say something she can use against you. We respond through the legal system, not social media." But it was impossible not to look, not to see the ways strangers were dissecting her character, her motivations, her worth as a human being. Someone had found her Facebook page from college and screenshot photos from parties where Evelyn looked drunk or disheveled. Another account was posting side-by-side photos of the sisters, pointing out how Lauren was glowing and successful, while Evelyn looked miserable and bitter. The cruelty was breathtaking in its creativity, each comment building on the last, constructing a version of Evelyn that bore no resemblance to reality but felt more real than the truth because thousands of people believed it. The confrontation came 3 days later, unplanned and inevitable. Evelyn had gone to a Target in Lakewood to buy basic necessities, toothpaste, cheap clothes to replace what she'd lost, when she saw Lauren at the end of the aisle, frozen in place like they were two gunfighters in an old western. For a moment, neither of them moved. The store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A child screamed somewhere in the distance. And the sisters who'd once shared a bedroom, traded clothes, stayed up late talking about boys and dreams and futures they'd never imagined would lead here, they stared at each other across 15 feet of linoleum like strangers bound together by nothing but damage. Lauren moved first, walking toward Evelyn with purpose, her face a careful mask that could have been anger or grief or both. "We need to talk." "I don't think we should," Evelyn said, her hand tightening on her shopping basket. "My lawyer said." "Fuck your lawyer." Lauren's voice cracked. "I'm your sister. Don't I get to defend myself? Don't I get to tell you my side before you destroy my entire life?" People were starting to stare. A store employee was glancing over nervously, probably trying to decide if this was the kind of confrontation that required management. Evelyn felt her heart racing, her palms sweating, her body remembering smoke and panic and the sensation of falling even though she was standing perfectly still. "Your side." Evelyn's voice came out harder than she'd intended. "Your side is that it was just a prank. That you didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. That I should forgive you and move on like none of this happened. It's the truth." Lauren's eyes were filling with tears, real ones, Evelyn thought, or maybe just more of the performance. It was impossible to tell anymore. "Evie, I swear on everything I love, we didn't know there would be a real fire. The plan was to trigger the alarm for 30 seconds. That's it. Scare people a little, film their reactions, turn it off. We tested it the week before and it worked perfectly." The admission hung between them, damning in its casualness. "You tested it," Evelyn repeated slowly. "You broke into the building's fire alarm system multiple times. You planned this. You knew it would terrify people, and you did it anyway. For content." Lauren's voice rose, drawing more attention. "Yes, for my channel, for my career, for the thing that pays my bills and makes me happy. Is that so wrong? Everyone does pranks. It's what people watch. It's what gets views. And I never, ever intended for anyone to actually get hurt. But I did get hurt." Evelyn's voice dropped to something just above a whisper, forcing Lauren to lean in to hear her. "I almost died. And you stood there watching. You filmed me. You were more concerned about getting the right angle than making sure I was okay. I was in shock." The tears were flowing freely now, Lauren's voice breaking with what sounded like genuine anguish. "I didn't know what to do. Everything was happening so fast. The alarm wasn't supposed to cause a real fire. How was I supposed to know the building's wiring was that bad? How is any of this my fault when the landlord is the one who should have fixed?" "Stop." Evelyn held up her hand. "Just stop. You don't get to deflect this onto someone else. You pulled the alarm. You created the panic. Everything that happened after that is a consequence of your choice." Lauren wiped at her face, smearing mascara across her cheeks. "So that's it? You're really going to do this? You're going to take me to court, ruin my reputation, destroy everything I've built, all because you want someone to blame for bad luck? Bad luck?" The words came out as a bitter laugh. "Lauren, I have $47,000 in medical debt. I lost everything I owned. I wake up every night at 2:47 a.m. feeling like I'm suffocating. I can't climb stairs without having a panic attack. And you're calling it bad luck? What do you want from me?" Lauren's voice had shifted now, moving from defense to something that sounded almost like negotiation. "Money? Is that what this is about? Because I can pay your medical bills. I'll write you a check right now. I'll cover everything. Just drop the lawsuit." The offer should have been tempting. It was exactly what Evelyn needed, a way to escape the debt, to start over, to move forward without the months of legal battles that Sarah had warned her about. But something about the way Lauren said it, the casual assumption that everything could be fixed with money, that accountability could be bought off like a parking ticket, made Evelyn's blood run cold. "You think this is about money?" Evelyn's voice was eerily calm now. "You think I'm doing this because I want your YouTube revenue? Aren't you?" Lauren shot back. "Come on, Evie. You've always been jealous of my success. You've always made little comments about how what I do isn't real work, how I'm just lucky, how anyone could do it. And now you see an opportunity to take what I've built in. I want you to take responsibility." The words came out with such force that Lauren actually stepped back. "I want you to admit, not just to me, but to everyone, to your followers, to the world, that what you did was wrong. That it wasn't just bad luck or an accident or something that happened to me. That you made choices that nearly killed me, and that those choices have consequences. Lauren's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, calculation. When she spoke again, her voice was cold in a way Evelyn had never heard before. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Here's the truth. That night, when I saw you in the hallway, when you were stumbling around like you were drunk, there was a part of me, just for a second, that thought maybe it would be easier if you didn't make it out." The confession hit Evelyn like a physical blow. The target aisle tilted sideways. Somewhere far away, someone was asking if they were okay, if they needed help, but Evelyn couldn't respond. She could only stare at her sister, at this person she'd shared a childhood with, and try to process what she'd just heard. "Not because I hate you," Lauren continued, her voice shaking now with what might have been honesty or might have been something worse. "But because I knew. I knew that if you survived, if you remembered, if you figured it out, this would happen. You'd make me the villain. You'd take everything from me. And I thought maybe it would be better for everyone if..." She stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I didn't mean that. I didn't." But she had. And they both knew it. Evelyn dropped her shopping basket. The sound of plastic hitting linoleum echoed through the aisle. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion now. "Don't call. Don't text. Don't come near me. The next time we see each other will be in court." She walked away before Lauren could respond, moving through the store in a daze, leaving behind the toiletries and cheap clothes and any remaining illusion that this was about miscommunication or forgivable mistakes. This was about something darker, something that lived in a space between intention and action, in that terrible moment when someone you loved looked at your suffering and saw not tragedy but convenience. Outside, in the parking lot, Evelyn leaned against a car that wasn't hers and called Sarah. "I need you to file an amended complaint," she said when the lawyer answered. "I need to add intentional infliction of emotional distress. Because my sister just admitted she considered letting me die." "Did you record it?" Sarah asked immediately. Evelyn looked down at her phone, at the voice memo app that had been running since she'd first seen Lauren in the store, an old habit from therapy, a need to document everything now that she understood how easily truth could be erased. "Yes," she said. "I recorded everything." The settlement negotiations took place in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and desperation, on the 14th floor of a building downtown where the windows didn't open and the air conditioning hummed with a frequency that made Evelyn's teeth ache. It was February now, 4 months since the fire, and the Denver skyline outside was gray and unforgiving, the kind of winter day that made you forget the sun had ever existed. Evelyn sat on one side of the mahogany table with Sarah beside her, a stack of documents between them that represented everything they'd built: depositions, expert testimonies, the audio recordings that had been forensically authenticated, medical records that detailed every injury, every nightmare, every panic attack that had required emergency intervention. On the other side sat Lauren's legal team, 2 attorneys in suits that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe, a PR consultant who'd been furiously typing on her phone since they'd arrived, and Lauren herself, looking smaller than Evelyn remembered, her makeup understated in a way that suggested her lawyers had specifically told her to look remorseful rather than glamorous. They hadn't made eye contact yet. Evelyn had been staring at the tables with grain for the past 20 minutes, tracing the patterns with her eyes, trying to find shapes in the whorls, anything to avoid looking at the person who'd once been her closest friend and was now sitting across from her like an adversary in a war neither of them could win. "Let's begin," said Richard Chin, Lauren's lead attorney, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a kind of calm authority that came from winning more cases than he'd lost. "My client wants to start by saying that she deeply regrets what happened. The pain and suffering Ms. Hart has endured is something Lauren thinks about every single day." Evelyn felt Sarah tense beside her, a subtle shift that meant don't react, don't give them anything. But Evelyn couldn't help the bitter smile that tugged at her lips. Regret. Such a convenient emotion. So easy to claim, so impossible to disprove. That being said, Chen continued, we need to be realistic about liability here. The fire was caused by faulty wiring that the building's owner failed to address despite multiple complaints. The alarm, while admittedly inappropriate, did not cause the electrical fire. At most, my client is guilty of poor judgment that contributed to a chaotic evacuation. That's not the same as causing the injuries Ms. Hart sustained. Sarah leaned forward, her voice cool and professional. Your client admitted to planning and executing a prank that directly resulted in panic, chaos, and my client's near-death experience. She filmed the event with the intention of monetizing it through her social media platform, which establishes a profit motive. And she has since admitted, on a recorded conversation, that she considered allowing my client to die because it would be easier. That moves us well beyond poor judgment into the territory of criminal negligence and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The room went very quiet. Lauren's face had gone pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The PR consultant stopped typing. And Chen's expression flickered with something that might have been concern or might have been recalculation. That recording was obtained without consent, Chen said carefully. It may not be admissible. Colorado is a one-party consent state, Sarah replied smoothly. My client was part of the conversation. The recording is entirely legal and will absolutely be admissible. And even if it weren't, the fact that your client said those words to my client's face, that she admitted considering letting her sister die, is testimony my client can and will provide under oath. Lauren spoke for the first time, her voice small and trembling. I didn't mean it like that. I was upset. I was angry. People say things they don't mean when they're emotional. People say what they mean when they think no one's recording, Evelyn said quietly, finally looking up, finally meeting her sister's eyes across the table. You meant it, Lauren. Maybe not in the moment of the fire, but in that Target parking lot, you meant it. You wished I hadn't survived because surviving made me a problem you had to solve. Tears were streaming down Lauren's face now, but Evelyn felt nothing, no sympathy, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where family used to live. Evie, please. I'm so sorry. I've lost everything already. My sponsors dropped me. My channel is dying. Mom and Dad won't speak to me. I've been getting death threats. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Haven't I been punished enough? The question hung in the air, pathetic and genuine. And for a moment, just a moment, Evelyn felt the pull of old loyalties, old love, the part of her that remembered being 7 years old and holding Lauren's hand on the first day of school, promising they'd always protect each other. But then she remembered smoke. And falling. And the sound of her own screaming on that audio file. And the memory hardened into something unbreakable. No, Evelyn said simply. You haven't. Chen cleared his throat. Let's talk numbers. We're prepared to offer $200,000. Full settlement, mutual non-disclosure agreement, both parties agree not to discuss the case publicly. Sarah didn't even pause. $450,000. No NDA. My client has every right to tell her story. That's unreasonable, Chen said. My client doesn't have that kind of liquid capital. Then she can sell her equipment, her car, her apartment. She can get a loan. She can do what every other person who causes harm does, figure it out. Sarah's voice was ice now. Your client monetized my client's trauma. She built her entire platform on pranks that crossed lines and hurt people. This is the consequence of that business model. The negotiations dragged on for 2 hours, back and forth, offers and counteroffers, veiled threats about what would come out in trial, what the jury would think, how the media would cover it. Evelyn stopped following the specifics after a while, let Sarah handle the combat, and instead found herself thinking about the word settlement. How it was supposed to mean resolution, closure, the end of conflict. But how it really just meant that both sides were too exhausted to keep fighting, that the truth had been compressed into a number that satisfied no one and resolved nothing except the immediate financial crisis. Finally, at 4:47 p.m., they reached an agreement. $325,000. Payable within 60 days. A structured statement that Lauren would post acknowledging her role in the incident without admitting criminal liability. No NDA, Evelyn could tell her story, but Lauren retained the right to tell hers. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't justice. But it was something. Sarah pushed the papers across the table. If we all sign now, this ends today. Lauren's hand shook as she picked up the pen. She looked at Evelyn one last time, her eyes searching for something, forgiveness, maybe, or understanding, or some acknowledgement that they were both victims of circumstances beyond their control. But Evelyn had nothing left to give her. She'd spent 4 months building this case, surviving the online harassment, watching her family disintegrate, reliving her trauma in depositions and medical evaluations. The sister she'd known was gone, replaced by this hollow version who'd learned all the wrong lessons from her platform, that entertainment justified harm, that apologies could erase consequences, that love meant protecting the person who hurt you. Lauren signed. Then her attorneys. Then Sarah. And finally, Evelyn, her signature shaky but deliberate, the pen pressing hard enough to leave an indentation on the pages beneath. It was done. They filed out of the conference room in silence. No handshakes, no pleasantries, just the mechanical business of ending something that should never have needed to end this way. Evelyn and Sarah took the elevator down together, neither speaking until they were outside on the street where the February wind cut through Evelyn's cheap coat and made her eyes water. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. Evelyn thought about the question. How did she feel? Not victorious, there was no triumph in this. Not relieved, the money would solve immediate problems but create new ones, questions about taxes and how to rebuild and whether she even wanted to stay in Denver anymore. Not healed, trauma didn't evaporate just because a check was written. Tired, she said finally. "I feel tired." Sarah nodded, understanding in her expression. "The first payment will hit your account within 30 days. After legal fees and expenses, you'll clear about $280,000. It's enough to pay off your medical debt, put a down payment on a new place, start over somewhere fresh if you want." Start over. As if starting over were that simple. As if you could just take money and use it to buy a new life, a new family, a new version of yourself that hadn't been broken by someone who was supposed to love you. "Thank you," Evelyn said, because Sarah deserved that much. "For everything. For believing me." "You made it easy to believe," Sarah replied. "You had the truth on your side. That matters more than people think." They parted ways at the corner, Sarah heading back to her office, Evelyn walking to the train station with her hands shoved deep in her pockets, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The city moved around her with indifferent efficiency, people rushing to happy hours, to dinner dates, to lives that hadn't been interrupted by fires and betrayal and the devastating cost of choosing truth over family. That night, alone in her borrowed room, Evelyn received the email notification that the settlement had been officially filed. It was real now. Legally binding. The end of one chapter and the beginning of whatever came next. She opened her banking app and stared at the balance that still showed negative, that would stay negative for weeks until the first payment cleared, and tried to imagine what it would feel like to see those numbers go positive, to be free of the debt that had been crushing her since October. But all she could think about was the price. Not the money Lauren would pay, but the cost Evelyn had paid to get here, her family, her innocence, her ability to trust that the people who loved you wouldn't trade your life for content. $325,000 seemed like a lot until you divided it by all the things you'd lost. Then it felt like nothing at all. She opened the voice memo app one last time, playing back the audio from the fire, not the whole thing, just the last few seconds before she'd fallen. Lauren's voice, clear and unmistakable, "Are you getting this?" And underneath it, so faint she'd missed it the first dozen times she'd listened, another voice. Her own. Calling for her sister. Still believing, even as she fell, that Lauren would help her. Evelyn deleted the file. She didn't need it anymore. The lawyers had copies, the court had copies, and she had her memory, which was the one thing no settlement could erase and no amount of money could heal. 6 months after the settlement, Evelyn Hart stood in the doorway of a small apartment in Boulder, 25 miles from Denver and a lifetime away from the person she'd been before the fire. The space was modest, a one-bedroom with windows that faced east, catching the morning light that spilled across hardwood floors she'd chosen herself. Everything here was new, the furniture from IKEA that she'd assembled alone, the dishes that had never belonged to anyone else, the walls that held no memories of smoke or falling or the sound of her sister's laughter echoing through hallways that no longer existed. The medical bills were paid. All of them. The hospital, the specialists, the therapist she saw twice a week who was teaching her that healing wasn't linear, that some wounds never fully closed but could be managed, could be lived with. The money had done what money does, solved the tangible problems, created breathing room, provided the basic dignity of financial stability. But it hadn't bought peace. Peace, Evelyn was learning, wasn't for sale. She rarely thought about Lauren anymore, or at least that's what she told herself. The truth was more complicated. Her sister existed now as a phantom limb, something that had been amputated but still sent signals of pain, still ached in the space where it used to be. Lauren's YouTube channel had never recovered. The subscriber count had plummeted after she'd posted her court-mandated statement, a carefully worded acknowledgement of poor judgment that satisfied the legal requirements while admitting nothing substantial. The comments section had been brutal, divided between die-hard fans who insisted Lauren was the victim of a vindictive sister and former followers who felt betrayed by the revelation that the pranks they'd laughed at had real consequences. Evelyn had watched the statement once, alone in her new apartment, and then never again. Lauren's face on the screen had looked older somehow, hollowed out by months of legal battles and public judgment. She'd cried at the right moments, said the right words, performed remorse with the skill of someone who'd spent years crafting content for maximum emotional impact. But Evelyn could see through it now, could see the calculation beneath the tears, the way Lauren was still trying to control the narrative even in defeat. The family had fractured exactly as Sarah had predicted. Patricia and Roger had chosen silence, not quite taking Lauren's side, but not supporting Evelyn either, trapped in the uncomfortable middle ground of parents who couldn't reconcile loving both daughters with the reality that one had nearly killed the other. They'd sent a card when Evelyn moved, a generic, thinking of you, message with no return address, no phone number, no invitation to rebuild what had been destroyed. It was the kind of gesture that felt worse than nothing, proof that they cared enough to acknowledge her existence but not enough to actually be present in her life. Evelyn had stopped waiting for an apology from them. You couldn't apologize your way out of choosing wrong when the choice had mattered most. She'd made new connections in Boulder, carefully, slowly, with the caution of someone who'd learned that the people closest to you could also be the most dangerous. There was Maya, her neighbor, a grad student studying environmental science who'd knocked on Evelyn's door one evening with brownies and an easy smile that demanded nothing in return. There was the book club at the local library where Evelyn had started going on Thursday nights, sitting in a circle with strangers who knew nothing about fires or lawsuits or sisters who filmed your suffering. And there was Dr. Chen, no relation to Lauren's attorney, which Evelyn had specifically verified, the therapist who was helping her understand that survival and recovery were different things, that you could live through something and still be dying from it in slow motion. The panic attacks had decreased but hadn't disappeared. They came at odd times now, not just at 2:47 a.m., but in grocery stores when someone burned food in the adjacent apartment, in parking garages where the smell of gasoline triggered memories of smoke, in elevators that moved too slowly and felt too much like being trapped. Dr. Chen called them echoes, the way trauma reverberates through time, finding new surfaces to bounce off of long after the original sound has faded. On a Saturday in August, almost 10 months after the fire, Evelyn was walking through Pearl Street Mall when she saw her. Not Lauren, but Patricia, her mother, sitting alone at an outdoor cafe with a cup of coffee and a book she wasn't reading. She looked older, grayer, the kind of aging that happens when stress does its quiet work over months of pretending everything is fine when nothing is. Evelyn could have walked away. Should have walked away. There was nothing her mother could say that would undo the abandonment, no explanation that would make the silence acceptable. But something pulled her forward, not forgiveness exactly, but curiosity about what kind of person could watch their child choose truth and decide that was the betrayal worth punishing. "Mom." Patricia looked up, and the shock on her face was almost comical, eyes widening, mouth opening, the book slipping from her hands and hitting the pavement with a sound that made people at nearby tables turn to look. "Evelyn. I didn't know you were in Boulder. I've been here since March." Evelyn remained standing, not accepting the unspoken invitation to sit, to pretend this was a normal encounter between mother and daughter. "You would know that if you'd bothered to ask." Patricia's face crumpled slightly. "I wanted to reach out. I didn't know what to say." "How do you talk to your daughter after everything that happened? After the family fell apart?" "You could start with, 'I'm sorry.'" The words came out harsher than Evelyn intended, but she didn't soften them. "You could acknowledge that you chose Lauren's comfort over my survival. That you asked me to protect the person who nearly killed me." "She didn't mean to," Patricia started, then stopped, recognizing the argument for what it was, a reflex, the same defense she'd been repeating for months because admitting the alternative was too painful. "Didn't she?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Because I have a recording of her admitting she thought about letting me die. And you know what the worst part is? I don't even think she's a monster. I think she's just someone who was so obsessed with content, with views, with validation from strangers that she forgot real people can't be edited. That consequences exist outside the algorithm." Patricia was crying now, quiet tears that tracked through her makeup. "I love both of you. How am I supposed to choose between my daughters?" "You already did," Evelyn said. "The moment you asked me to let it go, to forgive without accountability, to pretend that family means accepting harm without consequences, you chose. And I understand it. She's easier to love right now. She's the one who needs defending. I'm just the one who survived." The silence between them stretched out, filled with everything they'd never say, apologies that wouldn't come, forgiveness that wasn't ready to be given, the slow understanding that some relationships don't survive the weight of their own dysfunction. "Are you happy?" Patricia asked finally. "Here, in your new life. Are you happy?" Evelyn considered the question. Was she happy? Not in the uncomplicated way she'd been before, not with the easy joy of someone who'd never learned that safety was an illusion and family could be as dangerous as strangers. But there were moments, morning coffee in her apartment while watching the mountains turn gold with sunrise, conversations with Maya about nothing important, the Thursday night book club where she'd laughed genuinely for the first time in months. Small happinesses that didn't erase the trauma but existed alongside it, proving that life could continue even after everything broke. "I'm surviving," Evelyn said. "Some days that's enough." She walked away before her mother could respond, before the conversation could devolve into more excuses or half-hearted attempts at reconciliation. Behind her, she heard Patricia call her name once, but Evelyn didn't turn around. There would be no tearful reunion, no healing moment where everything was forgiven and the family reassembled itself into something functional. That wasn't how real life worked. That was movie logic, the kind of neat resolution that people like Lauren traded in, problems solved in 30 minutes, everyone learning their lesson, fade to black with swelling music. Reality was messier. Reality was carrying your damage forward and learning to build a life around it. Reality was understanding that preserving the truth had cost her everything except her integrity, and some days that trade felt worth it and some days it felt like the worst bargain ever made. That night, alone in her apartment, Evelyn opened her laptop and typed out a message she'd been composing in her head for months. Not to Lauren, they had nothing left to say to each other. But to the other survivors of the fire, the neighbors who'd fled that building and carried their own trauma forward. She posted it in the building's former tenant Facebook group, where people occasionally checked in, sharing updates about new apartments and insurance settlements and the slow process of moving on. "It's been almost a year since the fire," she wrote. "I don't know if anyone else still thinks about it the way I do, at 2:47 a.m. when sleep won't come, or in moments when you smell smoke and your body remembers before your mind catches up. But I wanted to say something I wish someone had said to me: surviving doesn't mean you have to forgive. It doesn't mean you have to make peace with what happened or find meaning in your suffering. Sometimes surviving just means you're still here, still breathing, still fighting to build something new from the ashes. And that's enough. That's more than enough. She posted it without rereading, without second-guessing, and then closed the laptop. The responses would come or they wouldn't. People would understand or they wouldn't. But she'd said her truth, and truth was the one thing she'd fought too hard to win to give up now. Outside her window, Boulder settled into night, lights flickering on in apartments across the way, people moving through their own lives with their own damages and triumphs and quiet desperations. Evelyn watched them for a while, these strangers who would never know her story, and felt something that wasn't quite peace but was close enough. She'd survived. She'd demanded accountability. She'd paid the price of truth and was still standing. Not every story ended with forgiveness. But some stories ended with survival. And tonight, that was enough. Evelyn Hart survived a fire that was never meant to be a fire. She survived a prank that was never really a prank. And she survived the devastating choice between family and truth, a choice that most of us pray we'll never have to make. But here's what her story teaches us: sometimes the people who hurt us most aren't strangers in dark alleys or villains in obvious disguises. Sometimes they're the ones who know exactly where we're vulnerable because they helped build those vulnerabilities. Sometimes they're family. And when that happens, when love becomes the weapon used against you, the question isn't whether you have the right to fight back. The question is whether you have the strength to live with the cost of winning. So I want you to ask yourself something as this story ends. If you were in that hospital bed, buried under medical debt you didn't earn, carrying trauma you didn't choose, holding evidence that could change everything, what would you do? Would you preserve the family and swallow the injustice? Would you choose peace over accountability because forgiveness is supposed to be noble? Or would you do what Evelyn did, demand that actions have consequences, even when those consequences destroy the only family you've ever known? There's no right answer. There's only the answer you could live with. And sometimes, surviving isn't about making peace with what happened. Sometimes it's about refusing to let what happened define what happens next. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that truth has a price but silence has a cost, subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Evelyn's don't just entertain us. They challenge us to examine what we do when tested, who we become when everything breaks, and whether we'd have the courage to choose ourselves even when the world tells us that's selfish. Thank you for listening. And remember, not every story ends with forgiveness. But every story worth telling ends with truth.